Happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to the Cafe on Air podcast. I am Big Italy 42, joined here by Space Jam 23 DFS, Christopher Ruckus. What's going on, man? I know we got a ugly slate of games. I guess the games aren't ugly, but a 3-game slate, not exactly enticing tonight.
No, exactly. Not enticing. Got a good slate to be a fan. Not a good slate to be a DFS player. However, 3 games always tough. But as a basketball fan, I'll enjoy the games tonight.
Yeah, I mean, at least we've got some high totals. I mean, we've seen some of these short slates where you got 185, 190 point totals, at least all over 200. So should be some points scored. Some nice, really odd big scores tonight, hopefully. So we're going to kick things off by talking a little recap from last night. There were some really, really big performers. And if you missed out on these guys, your chances of making big money went right out the window. So starting off at first, we had DeMarcus Cousins, who it was potential that he may sit on the road game. Maybe he would sit some other games. But all he did was play and absolutely dominate. George Karl said before the game he was the A, B, and C option. And he was absolutely all of those things last night. Put up a monster stat line. 24 points, 21 rebounds, 10 assists, 6 blocks, 3 steals. So DeMarcus Cousins, very low owned, except for on the late swap sites like DK. So 80 fantasy points right around on every site. So he was a monster. Other side of that one, we had James Harden. Once again, I mentioned last time he hit 50 points that I couldn't believe he hadn't scored 50 before. Went for 50, 8 and 6 last night also. So you're noticing a trend here, obviously. If you had those two guys, you had a nice night. And also Chris Paul with a monster game, 41 and 17 for him. So big time performance.
Did Big Italy, did you call out the narrative street that after getting your ankles busted, he comes back and goes crazy like that last night?
I mean, I was big on Chris Paul, and I said keep targeting Damian Lillard, especially in this high total, close game. I was all about Chris Paul last night, had myself some shares, and he did not disappoint. I mean, 41 and 17. If there's any way to get yourself off of all those memes and back into the spotlight, that's the way to do it right there.
How about even, checking at the box score, Blake Griffin nearing a triple-double last night with 8 assists. Way to go, big man.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw DeMarcus Cousins did have a triple-double. I mean, of course, Russell Westbrook had one, a really pathetic one by his standards, 31, 11, and 11, which is an incredible line for most players, but he was actually pretty terrible last night, despite the big total, because 6 turnovers, shot just 10 for 32 from the field. Really just not a great game for him. But his teammate, Enes Kanter, another guy that I was big on last night, I said, that's the guy I target instead of Russell Westbrook because he's got huge upside. And he had himself a monster game last night, too. Yeah. Elsewhere, here's a guy, I don't know if you noticed this one, Anthony Morrow in 29 minutes last night, 32 points, 32 real points. Outscored Russell Westbrook and Enes Kanter. I mean, not fantasy point-wise, but real point-wise. So 3 guys scoring 30 points on the Thunder. Most times you would not anticipate that Anthony Morrow would be one of those guys. But either way, last night, some huge scores. Seeing some guys up near 400 points on FanDuel. Close to that on DraftKings for some big scores. So if you're one of those people that got yourself some maybe DeMarcus Cousins along with Chris Paul or Chris Paul, Enes Kanter, whatever it may have been. I mean, there were some monster games. So I didn't quite hit 3 of those guys. I had a couple lineups with 2 of them, but not 3. So no huge score for me there. All right, we're going to talk about tonight's slate now. FanDuel and DraftKings. Run down the lines for us here. Miami at Cleveland, 199 point total. I guess I spoke too soon. It was 200 earlier. But 11.5 point favorite for the Cavs. No surprise. We've got Luol Deng, who's questionable. Kevin Love is a game time decision. You assume he should go unless we hear otherwise. Houston at Dallas, 210 point favorite, or 210 point total, 1.5 point favorite for Dallas. This is the one you want to get most of your exposure to, the only close game on the board. And then you've got Phoenix at Golden State, 210.5 point total, Golden State favored by 12.5. Brandon Knight doubtful for that one. Draymond Green speculating that he may sit as well, but we'll get into that in a minute. So, without further ado, Miami at Cleveland. Give me your main target for this. If you have to have one player from this game, obviously you're probably going to need more than one. But who's your favorite?
I mean, Miami, Cleveland, Goran Dragic.
Okay.
I'm going to be on Goran Dragic tonight. So there's one thing I want to touch on. So right now, end of the season, we've seen resting, we've seen a lot of weird things rotation wise. Miami Heat are seventh in the playoff run as of right now, likely making the playoffs. But do they really want to fall back to Brooklyn? Have to play Atlanta? This is a big spot for Miami. They need to get the win. I think you'll see a big game out of Dragic and also the veteran leadership out of Wade.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree there. And you've seen Wade already play really well against LeBron and company this season too. I know one game in particular, he had a monster game against the Cavs, and LeBron really on the other end, he's kind of coasted in these games. He's had his LeBron-esque 26 5-5 type of games, but like you said, I mean the Cavs, they're not going anywhere. They're going to be the 2 seed. They're not going up. They're really not going to be going down. So this is a much bigger game for the Heat. If they could pull this one off, then that's huge. So those two guys, and fairly priced too. You've got Dragic at 64 on FanDuel, 67 on DraftKings, and then Dwayne Wade at 7,300 on DraftKings is a really nice price, and 75 on FanDuel. So
I'll be honest, and thinking about it, if you're Cleveland, you're LeBron James. Obviously there's always that hostility with Miami, all of that. You can knock Miami back.
Yeah,
they're tied. You can knock them back a game. I think LeBron brings it tonight. I think that's a fantastic game, probably the game of the night. I also think Goran Dragic goes off. I really got a hunch for that. We know Kyrie Irving is a sieve. Should we call him a sieve?
Yes, we should definitely call him that.
He's on the line with Damian Lillard. So Goran Dragic tonight could be big in the short slate.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree there. And like you mentioned with LeBron, I mean, he doesn't want to see his old or maybe still current buddy Dwayne Wade in the first round. Obviously, you think Cleveland would have the advantage in that series easily, but it's still a tough matchup. We know that we've seen Wade turn it on still when healthy, one of the better scorers in the game.
Yeah, and then bringing it back. So on the short slate, we'll go a little bit deeper. I mean, Kyrie Irving has pretty good prices tonight. I don't mind his prices. I mean, he was getting up there. 8,100 on FanDuel, 7,700 on DK. They're not bad prices for a player that can score 50.
Yeah.
So, a nice contrarian play if you're looking for a point guard, Kyrie Irving, Uncle Drew.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you said that, and you said can score 50. So to give you a little bit of narrative here, I think I've mentioned this to you before. The last two full Cavs games I've watched, coincidentally, were the two Cavs games that Kyrie Irving scored 50 real points. So if you want some narrative there, I will be at the Cleveland game tonight, watching the entire game. So if he scores 50 and you play him, you're welcome. I'll take my 10%. Find me on Twitter. I'll tell you where to send my cut to with my PayPal address, because he's going to have to score 50 if I watch the game, right? Everything happens in threes.
Everything happens in threes.
It's the ultimate narrative right there. So obviously not really anticipating that happening. But, I mean, I do think he's in a fine spot. And, we've seen it before, James kind of deferring, especially in games where they're favored big. He kind of turns it on when he needs to turn it on. But we've seen it. I mean, when Kyrie gets hot, I mean, he's hard to stop. And he just knocks down some unbelievable shots when he gets it going.
Yeah, in our value pick, I guess we can talk about if Luol Deng does end up sitting, obviously more volume for Dragic and Wade, but also, people pivot to Beasley a lot. I'm a big fan of Henry the Skywalker. I am a huge, huge fan of him. He gets his shots, he gets the rebounds, he can fly. So something to look out for, before lock, Luol Deng. If not, take a look at Mr. Walker.
Yeah, and it's a shooting guard, which is a really weak position most nights, and especially weak tonight, outside of the obvious plays like James Harden. So, one other guy I want to talk about in this one who is getting big minutes. He does have some upside. J.R. Smith, very risky play, of course, but on a 3-game slate, you're going to have to try to differentiate yourself somewhere. The obvious plays at shooting guard are going to be Wade and Harden, but at $5,700 on FanDuel, particularly because you have to play two. I'm not going to force extra shooting guards in on DK. But I don't mind him at that price. 56 on DK if you wanted to go that route. But I think as a pivot, a different kind of shooting guard, the second shooting guard that is, I don't think he's a bad play. Elsewhere, I'm not paying for Hassan Whiteside in this one. Just too expensive, and he's really just not getting minutes right now, coming off that hand laceration, or as whatever we'd like to call it. It's called a cut. It's a cut. So whatever pretentious way you want to say it. He cut his hand, and he's coming back. So he's got upside, but I just don't see a need to pay for his price tag tonight, do you?
No.
All right.
Not at all.
Cool. That's going to pretty much settle it there. I'm not forcing any of these cheap guys into my lineup there in that game. No thanks. I'd rather go with guys from Houston at Dallas. We already mentioned the only close spread of the night, biggest total as well. So lots of points to be had here. Neither one of us need to tell you that James Harden is the top play in this game and overall in the slate because matchup with Monte Ellis coming off a monster game last night. He's got two 50 real point performances in his last 8 games. I mean, was the front runner for MVP. I still think he should be, but I mean, he's unstoppable right now. When James Harden gets it going, no one on that team has a chance to slow him down.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And touching again on our playoff picture, Dallas, 7th seed currently out west. OKC in 8th. They're playing for something. Dallas is playing for something as well. Game will be close. From Dallas's side, my sneaky play of the night will be Tyson Chandler. Hasn't been playing great, as of late. We'll check back, see, Houston's had a lot of injuries. What happened with Jonas Valanciunas earlier this week?
Yeah.
He went nuts versus Houston. Tyson Chandler, physical type player, could be a nice cheap type center play for you guys tonight.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, obviously, it's speculated Dwight Howard should play tonight, but as we know, still on that minutes limit, should see 20 tops. So even despite the tough matchup there, I mean, Tyson Chandler at 5,500 with really, really limited options at center. I don't mind that play at all.
Nope.
All right, elsewhere, you've obviously got more injuries like you mentioned. We don't really know the status of Donatas Motiejūnas or Terrence Jones yet. Terrence Jones played last night, but coming off a collapsed lung, he did play 32 minutes last night. So definitely some concern there that maybe they give him a little bit of rest tonight. But, I mean, if he's playing and we hear he's a full go, as you saw last night, he's got huge upside at 6,400.
Yeah, no, huge upside at 6,400. Also, I do like upside 6,500, small forward, Mr. Florida, Chandler Parsons. I do not mind Mr. Parsons tonight whatsoever. He's playing good basketball. Monta Ellis had a couple big games. The question is, who's chasing James Harden tonight?
Yeah, that's going to be the question. I mean, I don't think there's any reason for Dallas to have Parsons chasing him around because, I mean, he's not going to stop him either. You might as well just have Monte and Harden just go at it all night, which is going to be a hell of a show. Yeah,
I mean, personally, if, watching games this season, guards tend to get tired versus James Harden, mainly because you're playing high energy all game. I'm liking the opposing wingman guard type for Dallas. So if Monte's going to be chasing Harden all night, Chandler Parsons is going to be open for a lot more, he's just going to have more energy, better performance personally. And I do that a lot against Houston or teams playing against Houston. So Chandler Parsons, if you are not guarding James Harden, you will have a good night.
Yeah, I'll let him know next time I talk to him tonight.
Perfect.
But hey, he's got a great price, like you mentioned, 6,500 on both FanDuel and DraftKings. And small forward, I think the weakest position tonight. And of course, on FanDuel, you're going to have to roster too. Parsons makes for one of the better ones, dollar for dollar, especially in this high total, close game. Like you said, the game matters. So I do like Parsons quite a bit. On the other side of that specific matchup, you've got Trevor Ariza, who just continues to get it done. I mean, he's pretty much a lock for 25 fantasy points each night. He's got 35-point upside, maybe even 40 on his better days. He's sitting at $6,400 on FanDuel, 66 on DraftKings. So, I mean, if you're playing the two small forwards, if you want to go safety with some upside, you can go ahead and just lock in Trevor Ariza and Chandler Parsons there on FanDuel and just move on.
Yeah, and if you really say, listen, I do not like small forward, I need a pivot option, Al-Farouq Aminu is my pivot option. He matches up well regardless of what happens with Houston tonight because he's a good defender. He can defend the 4, can defend the 3. You could kind of place him even on Harden. I think Aminu probably gets a little bit more run tonight than he typically gets. And 3,700 on DK, 4K on FanDuel. Weird kind of short slate night. Aminu's not a bad play for a punt at small forward.
Yeah, and I like to think that really at any position, he has pretty much the biggest upside around that price point. Even if not given big minutes. I mean, we've seen it with him, and even if he only sees 20 minutes, he's got 25, 30 fantasy point upside because he fills it up. So I really like that call a lot. Elsewhere, and this one, we already kind of mentioned the power forwards here. It's really not a lot to be seen here. Modi Yunus, if he played, I would like him. I don't think he's probably going to play. You could look at Dirk Nowitzki, but he's more of a high floor, not worth a tournament play because he really doesn't have much upside. I mean, last night against OKC went for 18, 4, and 3 in 32 minutes, but I mean that's about as good as it gets with Dirk Nowitzki right now.
Yeah, completely.
All right. Elsewhere on this one, I'm not playing Jason Terry. He's terrible. He way too old. He just kind of sits out there even when he gets minutes. Doesn't need to do much, and he's taking advantage of the fact he doesn't need to do much. So even if he's still starting, which he should be, just not for me.
I love Jason Terry. When he played at Arizona, he was a phenomenal basketball player. It is kind of a bummer. You're right. He just kind of mopes around. But I don't know if you're a huge college hoops fan. Him and Baron Davis went head-to-head, shot for shot back in the day. Probably one of my favorite college moments. So every time I hear someone's out for Houston, I'm like, oh, maybe Jason Terry will find his jump shot again.
Yeah, I'm on the opposite side of that one. I'm a big Baron Davis fan. I remember his Golden State days, some exciting times in Oracle Arena there, and then the whole big playoff upset. I was a big fan of Baron Davis. I was disappointed when he went to Cleveland, didn't want to play, kind of fell off, but yeah, I mean, that's an exciting matchup. I'd like to still see those two play one-on-one, to be honest with you. I'm not sure what Baron Davis is doing, but I can't imagine he's that busy. We'll have to call him up and see if we can arrange something.
Yeah, maybe I'll get him on the podcast next week. We'll see what we.
I'll talk to Chandler Parsons. You go ahead and hit up Baron Davis to see what we can do.
Perfect.
All right, next game we've got Phoenix at Golden State. Another game here that really doesn't matter. I mean, we've got Golden State obviously has the 1 seed locked up. They've had it essentially locked up for quite a while. Officially, I believe it was last week. So some inherent concerns here with these guys maybe not seeing big minutes. Huge spread here at 12.5. Obviously, Steph Curry is your top option if you knew he was going to play minutes, but there's no guarantee he's going to play minutes or if he's going to need to do a whole lot. So he's sitting at $9,900 on FanDuel, $93 on DK. Really tournament-only option for me, and I don't expect him to play big minutes at all.
No, not at all. I don't see that at all. That's an expensive option for a slate when you're not going to get minutes. Go take Harden, pay up, end of story. Yep. Take the points and the minutes.
Yeah, I completely agree. If you're paying up, that's the way to go. And it seems like, this is one of those slates where if you're going to pay up for someone, you want to have your alternate routes. You want to be contrarian. I don't think that fading Harden is the way to go tonight. Like, I don't think there's any reason to be contrarian there. There's really not expensive options at any other position that you really need. So you can easily fit Harden into any lineup you want.
Yeah, especially when you're looking at probably my top value of the night. He's not Mr. Wrong. He is Mr. Right. Brandon Wright is going to see minutes. I mean, you just said it. Golden State's probably resting players. They're resting good players, which means they are not resting David Lee tonight, which means David Lee might see some time at the 5, the 4. If he sees any time on the court, I like the opposing team. Brandon Wright is my top value of the night.
Yeah, and I'm completely on board with you there. And the best part is you can get him at a weak center position at $4,600 on FanDuel. And over on DraftKings, you can play him at power forward for $4,100. So, like we've seen before, when Alex Len is out, he has to play big minutes, and he's been productive too. So, I love that. And imagine this, Golden State has nothing to play for. One of their older players, who is their best post defender, Andrew Bogut, even if he plays, I wouldn't be shocked to see him sit, but even if he plays, he's not going to be playing big minutes. We've seen it from Bogut before. Maybe 15 to 18 tops. So, puts him in a great spot there. Also, some speculation, like we mentioned earlier, that Draymond Green may sit tonight. So, obviously, if you were looking to play him, which I'm not, I mean, take that into consideration before you lock him into your lineups. But even if he does play, I mean, you don't expect him to play big minutes either. So, really a lot of risk there.
Yeah, I mean, if he doesn't play, who are we replacing him with? I know a lot of people talk a lot further down, but someone simply at Harrison Barnes. He's a good basketball player. He's young. You see a lot of these younger players who aren't, elites get bigger minutes in these rest-type games. If we see Draymond Green sit, I do like Harrison Barnes in this up-tempo matchup. I might be biased being a UNC fan, but I don't mind Harrison Barnes if Draymond sits. I think it's a good play.
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue with you there. That's a fine play, and he's really cheap too. So if it's not him, then it would be Andre Iguodala for me, assuming that he plays. He's had some games where he sat, but he sat 2 games ago, played the last game, and he's like the garbage time extraordinaire there for Golden State. He and Sean Livingston as well, who has struggled recently, but Iguodala, we've seen it before. He'll have 7 fantasy points going into the fourth quarter and finish with 25 in a blowout. So I think maybe if I'm going to go contrarian there at small forward, one of those two guys, I'll probably just go 50-50 and just chop it in half because they're similar priced, similar type players. But I do think that Barnes has the bigger upside, though, especially if he ends up starting tonight.
Yeah.
All right, elsewhere, like we mentioned, David Lee. If Draymond sits, he will probably get the start. But at the same time, I don't like playing David Lee. It's not a great matchup, and he's just an awful defender. I'll love if he starts so that I can play Markieff Morris against him and Brendan Wright and whoever else is going to be up against him. But David Lee, just not for me. Even if he plays, they've been still monitoring minutes. So Golden State really, by far, the riskiest team on the board tonight.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this from the Suns angle, I like 4 Suns: Brandon Wright, Markieff Morris, Marcus Morris, and PJ Tucker. Those are going to be my top 4, points per dollar / value plays on Phoenix. I don't know. I said this on our last podcast. Something's going on with Eric Bledsoe. Not entirely sure on what. He's just not playing great basketball right now. Even with, Brandon Knight's doubtful not playing. Not too sure. So I'm bumping him down my list, especially when James Harden is shooting guard. There's that positional opportunity cost for that. Yeah. So, just not huge on him.
Yeah, I completely agree there. All right, that's going to pretty much wrap things up for us here. Anybody else you want to talk about in this game, or are we good to go on this exciting 3-game slate?
I mean, this exciting 3-game slate. We could go back to the all-college lineup and just play T.J. Warren, Harrison Barnes, Sean Livingston, Stephen Curry, and call it a night. We just do the all-college lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this. If I have to stack one game aside from the one that I'll be at, because it'll be exciting, it's going to be Houston-Dallas because it's going to be the closest game. You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And, and get your value from Brandon Wright and Marcus Morris from this game.
Yeah, 100%. All right, appreciate you hanging out with us today. I will see you all again tomorrow along with Spencer Limbach, and Chris will be back here in a couple days. Check out all the great content we have at dailyfantasycafe.com. I'm at BigItaly42. He is at SpaceJam23DFS.